I'm wondering how you came up with that $56 billion over 5-year number. How do you know that's enough when we don't have clarity on policy from D.C.?
Alex, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And, I would suggest that we are an important infrastructure operator in all the states that we serve, and we happen to be located in growing and thriving economies in the Southeast in particular. And so as we think about infrastructure, it not only includes the growth that we see in our states, but it includes the transition that you've been talking about all morning. As we see the need and the expectation that we have to lower carbon emissions, to improve reliability, in order to address cybersecurity risk and a variety of other things, we see great opportunities to invest. And so tomorrow at our ESG Day, we'll be focusing on the generation transition that we see over the next several decades to get to that net zero by 2050.
What I also was interested in is you guys ran a report that sort of said, look, if we're going to get 70% of our energy from renewables, this is how much it's going to cost you, the consumer. And you kind of like priced out different scenarios. And it was one of the first times that I've actually seen that from a utility that actually does wind up putting some costs on the customer. Can you talk me through what the base case is and any feedback that you've gotten from those numbers?
Sure. It's like anything, Alex. There's no single part of a solution. So as we think about driving carbon out of our generation fleet, it has to be done in a way that maintains reliability and maintains affordability for our states. We are an economic development engine for our states because energy is so important. And so as we thought about laying out for the states of North and South Carolina a transition plan to reduce carbon, we included a variety of scenarios. What is the least cost option? What is the most aggressive option? What does a no new natural gas option look like? And it's proving to be an incredibly rich set of proposals and options to really spur that policy debate on how fast, what technologies to use, and how does it impact our customers. I think it's just a terrific opportunity to really advance this discussion in a way that meets environmental policy, but also meets economic expectations for our customers.
Lynn, good morning. When do you think you'll be free of coal? And when do you think you'll be free of the legacy of coal?
So coal is a relatively small percentage of Duke Energy's operations today, about 24%. And in every one of the scenarios that I was just talking about in the Carolinas, we will be out of coal-only assets by 2030. In Indiana, it'll be slightly longer, into the 2030s, and one particular asset might run a bit longer, but we have options with some of these assets actually to convert to natural gas or retire more quickly if the policy indicates. And so I think these options, Guy, that I was talking about really calls the question on how fast, and we'll move as fast as our states and customers are ready to go.
How does natural gas fit into that? And specifically, I'm talking about the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. You're a big believer in that for a long time. You stuck it out for a while to bring natural gas from the Northeast down to the Carolinas, but it just couldn't happen, and it was taking too long regulatory-wise. What's your solution for that?
Alex, I'd like to talk about a couple of things, and we focus on the Carolinas in this discussion. One of the challenges we have operationally is that the Carolinas is a winter peaking utility, meaning that we need power when it's dark on a winter morning at 7 a.m. And so we continue to have some amount of natural gas in our mix in order to match the need for electricity when the solar resources and wind resources aren't available. We are advocates for technology and technology development. We think that will occur, but because of the geographic positioning of the Southeast, natural gas will be a part of it for some time. Atlantic Coast Pipeline, you have followed closely. We got to a point where the uncertainties around that project were such that it didn't make sense to continue pursuing. The economics and the timeline weren't fitting the needs of our customers. And so we'll be looking for other options to support infrastructure, to bring supplies for as long as we need natural gas in the region. And that work is underway.
Lynn, you talked there about technology. Are you talking about storage, battery storage? We've spoken to a number of guests over the last few days and weeks who have really been championing this idea that a disaggregated storage system in the United States can solve many of the problems that the energy network faces. How much are you investing into storage? How big a portion of that kind of peak load is going to be provided by storage?
The storage we see as being increasingly important, Guy. And if you look at what we've laid out as options, there are incredible amounts of storage, somewhere between 1 gigawatt and 7.5 gigawatts of storage over the next 10 to 15 years. We do think it represents a very solid solution, not only paired with solar, but also to support our transmission and distribution network. We are also advocates, though, for continued research and development around longer duration storage. What we have today kind of moves energy between hours. We need it to move energy for longer periods of time. We are also operators of something called pumped hydro storage, where you move water up a mountain and bring it down immediately when you need it. We think expansion of that resource could also be a way for us to bring in a resource that matches renewables more readily.
And that brings me to the capital spend and sort of all the outlay that has to happen. Different outlets were reporting that NextEra Energy, which is the world's biggest producer of wind and solar, made a bid for you guys. Can you confirm or deny that? And what do you think about utilities having to bulk up to make this kind of transition?
You know, Alex, I can't comment on the rumor, as you would expect, but I do think the transition to renewable energy and the transition to lower carbon sources are something that the industry is pursuing aggressively. Duke certainly is, and we have the scale and capability to accomplish that. As I sit here today, our carbon emissions are already down 39%. We operate over 8,000 megawatts of renewable energy. We're going to double that by 2025. So I think this represents a great growth opportunity. And listening to your prior segment around ESG investing, Duke Energy provides an opportunity to have exposure to that progression of clean energy as well as a great yield.
I mean, your stock has jumped in the last, month or so, but it was stagnating after we got out of COVID. And I just wonder, it doesn't have to be NextEra, but is there partnerships, are there JVs that make sense in this environment as we're not getting clarity from DC, going back to the beginning of our conversation, to help scale?
You know, I do think building momentum around growth is important, Alex, and that's exactly what we have been at work doing, putting together stakeholders, really working with our policymakers in our states to build the enthusiasm around this clean energy plan. And Governor Cooper here in North Carolina has an aspiration for the state to achieve more than 70% carbon emission reduction by 2030. And we believe that policy represents an extraordinary opportunity for the state to drive investment, to drive economic development, to drive employment, and we're anxious to partner with him in achieving his goals.
In terms of how you position your company, just to come back to the conversation with Katie Koch just a moment ago, how do you make sure that you are one of those companies that investors, when they're thinking about positioning their portfolios into sustainable energy, that you are near the top of the list? Do you think you're doing enough at this point? How do your investor relations team get out there and make that point?
You Guy, it's a really good question because it is an advancing discussion, and you all can see that in the conversations you're having on your program. One of the reasons we're having something called an ESG Investor Day tomorrow is to spend all of our time talking about not only the progress we've made in the environment, but our vision for the future. These scenarios that we're talking about on how to achieve carbon reduction, the investment opportunities that it represents for our investors. That'll be a centerpiece. We also will talk about social responsibility. We'll talk about strong corporate governance. We engage in very active dialogue with our investors in the fall of every year to focus on these items. So I think there's almost no amount of discussion that is too much at this point to highlight your track record and your vision for the future. And that's exactly what we're trying to do at Duke Energy.